just your average everyday trucker, keeping it real. I'm your host, Chris Blodgett, and you're listening to Real Talk Tuesday.
This week's topic is going to be: would the Titanic really have stayed afloat if it hit the iceberg head on? This is episode 137. Hey guys, welcome back. As always, appreciate you being here. So, the inspiration for this week's topic. The easiest way to explain it. I don't know if you guys have heard or either heard of or seen. There's like a virtual Titanic model that came out, and also there's a documentary or whatnot about it on, I don't know what platform it's on, but basically it's a video like on the TV or whatever, on one of the streaming platforms. They basically had put, or I guess they used like some robotic submarines or whatever, and they went all around the wreck site as well as the debris field, and had literally taken scans of everything. So on this documentary they had on TV or whatever, they basically had this big movie screen, and they had these people that were on the show that were talking, or they were talking about it, and they were literally walking right up to the screen where they were like, the screen would rotate and show different parts of the ship, the stern, the bow. They would show different features about it and stuff, showing that they were kind of being able to debunk certain things, like one of the crew members, I guess, was Officer Murdoch, I think. If you remember the Titanic movie about the sinking, near the end where Officer Murdoch basically saluted one of the other guys, put the gun to his head, and shot himself and fell overboard. I guess that was something that had been like witnesses had basically like testified about that he had abandoned his post, abandoned the ship, committed suicide or whatever. But on this documentary with the digital scan of the entire wreck and the wreck site and the debris field, they would have or they were able to like literally look at certain specific details. Like, I guess there was actually like on the side of the ship that Murdoch was releasing lifeboats. One of the contraptions that I guess raises lifeboats up before it puts it in the water. On the ocean floor, this device was in the up position, which, according to them, said that there was actually a lifeboat literally about to be launched just before it sank. And so they were showing like a little bit of a digital like recreation of like how things probably went down in the last minutes, and they were showing like water come up over the front end of the ship sink, water come all up over it, and basically that there would have been a lifeboat suspended ready to go in the water, and the water would have came up, washed the lifeboat off, and then basically washed Officer Murdoch off the ship. So basically they were debunking, they were saying that because I guess one of the crew members contested the testimony, saying that no, he didn't kill himself, he actually he was there till the end and whatever, and basically them seeing that this the way that the position that this was in on the ship on the ocean floor kind of more further backs up what they're saying about Officer Murdoch basically killing himself like he did in the movie or whatever. And one of the other things that I find interesting, and yeah, this is kind of a random topic, so I apologize, but I've kind of been a Titanic, not really a fanatic, but kind of, it's been something that has interested me for a while. Hell, so I guess for the past like 20 years at least. 20 years, little over 20 years, back when I was in high school, and way back before we had like, I guess we had internet, back in, with a lot of people, a lot of the younger generation, when they're like, what is dial up? What is that? You guys remember this? I mean, those of you that are a little bit older like me, you guys remember that time back before we even had like a variety of cell phones. Like, I know I had a cell phone during the last couple of years in high school, but it was like an analog. They had the brick phones. They were like 6 inches long, 3 or 4 inches in width or whatever, and they were really big. You look at, you're holding this big old, they literally would call them the brick phones. You hold this thing up to your ear. I had one after that was a little bit smaller. It was still probably about an inch or so thick, but it was about 4 or 5 inches long. And way back then, for all of you that nowadays, with the way technology is and cell phones, you can go anywhere with them, and there's no, like, you guys are probably wondering, like, what's roaming? What is that? Well, back when cell phones were first starting to kind of, when they first came out, and when they first started becoming a little bit digital, whatever, you still couldn't go outside a certain radius, because like literally you'd be what they called roaming, and they charged you extra for that. And then there was a time, like, I was with Sprint way back 2001ish, and they, the good old, one of my favorite phones I've ever had was the Nokia. And one of their features that you paid for with their phone service was basically, after 9 o'clock, free friends and family, free nights and weekends, whatever. So you could talk to, didn't have any limited minutes, any limited texts, versus during the day, they had like 500 minutes, 500 texts, but then free nights, free calls, texts, and whatever after 9 o'clock at night. So, but yeah, but back then when I was in high school, we had desktop computers where you would literally have it plugged into a modem, not a router, and you would have to dial into the internet and have that little familiar sound that a lot of us that are a little bit older know about. one of my favorite experiences, if one of my former high school friends that I'm connected with on Facebook, but I haven't chatted with in forever. Good old Jake, Jake, if you ever tune into this podcast, a little shout out to you. I'm not gonna give your last name, but he and I used to play a game that, if I could play it again, oh man, that game was by far one of my favorite games. Duke Nukem 3D on the computer. I would literally dial in from my computer into his computer. Basically, we'd have I'd have my computer connected to my phone line. He'd have his computer connected to his phone line, and he would set his up to receive, and I would set mine up to dial out. And I would put his number in there, and I would dial, and his computer would, of course, pick up, and then our games would connect. And so we'd be connected through dial-up internet on these Duke Nukem 3D games or whatever. So, those are the days. I love back when I actually, I still do a little bit of video gaming, but I'm not really too big on it right now. But maybe that'll change. But back then in high school, I actually had created a website online kind of dedicated to the Titanic sinking. I went all out with HTML, I coded it, whatever, had a bunch of like pictures from the wreck, pictures of the ship before it launched, articles about the sinking, all that stuff. It literally was full on site. I was so proud of it. And then there's a guy in high school that he and I didn't have a beef together. There's not I didn't have really any issues with him, and as far as I knew, he didn't have any issues with me. A guy named Dwayne, not gonna give his last name either, but he went by, and I don't know if he still does it, but there was back then, I believe he had some hacking skills and went by a name of Bionic Ferret or something. Hopefully he's given that up since, so he comes across this and he's still doing that kind of stuff and still uses that name. I apologize. I figured 20 years passed. Hopefully you're not, I don't know. But at one point, for whatever reason, I went to log into my site, to do some little bit of work on it, make it look a little better, do some updates, whatever. I log in, and all of a sudden, my site had on it was my name, my address, my phone number, and whatever. It's and I'm like, what the hell? What happened? And so. And I couldn't log, or I tried, or when I was me just trying to log in, and I couldn't log in. But I could go to the site, and I could see the main page, but I couldn't log in and change anything. And I kept trying to log in, and the funny thing about this hacker dude that, for whatever reason, blasted me publicly and put my information all out there. All of a sudden, I get an email from, a Bionic Ferret at Gmail or Hotmail or whatever it was. I don't remember what the email address was at this point, but I get an email from him basically saying, hey, I've been getting alerts about you trying to log in, so here's the login information. You might want to go ahead and log in and update your information on there. I thought, well, shit, if I can log in, I'm going to log in and delete the whole site because I don't want my information online, my information posted publicly where people can see my address and phone number or whatever. So I logged in and literally just deleted the site. I thought that was kind of stupid. I was like, you would think that, if you're a hacker and you're trying to cause problems for somebody, why would you give them a login? But I'm not complaining. I look back now and I found it interesting, but I was kind of glad that he did, because obviously he put his information in there. And so when I was trying to log in, I'm doing the reset password and everything, which I guess I could have kept doing. So he probably got annoyed because I was doing a lot. And so he emailed me and go ahead, log in. Here's the blah blah blah. Oh, cool. All right, cool. I'm like, I'm just gonna delete the whole thing. So just delete it and made the site disappear. Because I was like, well, obviously, like I lost everything because you deleted all my work. It's like, some bitch, motherfucker. You know, but I was like, but you know, went ahead and just. I don't even remember what the guy's last name was. I just remember the first name was Dwayne, I believe. You know, but I think his brother was like Billy or something. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows? But, and I might even be wrong about the first name. I don't know. But, so anyway, so I've always had kind of a. I've always been fascinated about the Titanic. I don't know why. And then when the movie came out back in 2000, like early, what was it, 98, 99? I don't remember when it came out. Back before graduation, obviously. Just before, like, maybe 2000 or something, I don't know. But when it came out, I probably went and saw the movie, like, 3 or 4 times. And then, you know, of course I bought it. And it was interesting for the... Everything's now digital. So those of you that are that are quite a bit younger, you know, and you look at, like, cassette tapes... Hell, even some people even look at DVDs. Some of the young people even look at DVDs and like that's really weird. Like everything's on online, like Netflix and Hulu and stuff. Like why do you have to? What's this? Putting something into a disc or something into a player to play it, you know, or even better, the cassette tapes. You know, what is that? What is that? Like, oh my gosh! Like I had a camcorder, with digital or digital video recorder that had that my grandfather on my mom's side, I guess, left me or whatever when he passed away or whatever. It had the little cassette tapes that were like maybe 3 or 4, probably like 3 inches wide or 3 inches long rather. And then, you know, so you'd record them in the camcorder, and then, but in order to play them on a regular cassette player or VHS player, they had these devices that looked like full-size VHS cassette tapes, but they had a compartment that you put the little cassette tapes into those and put the big cassette tape into the VCR and play it that way. So I had one of those for a little bit, so that was pretty cool. And I still have some of, I think, somewhere around here. I think I've seen a couple of the little VHS tapes that had some recordings on them that, you know, because eventually I pawned off the camcorder, you know, because couldn't really do much with them. But I think my youngest daughter has a little video recorder that I bought at one point. It's digital, so, you know, it's got the little pop out little screen. You pop it out, so that way you can select the menu. You could, you know, watch the recording as you're recording it on the little screen. It's kind of an upgrade of the actual VHS camcorder. But yeah, so back, you know, so always been kind of fascinated about it. I found it kind of interesting. You know, obviously it was tragic when those rich people, I guess, when they had that submersible that they sold tickets to for them to go down and visit the Titanic wreck. But and then of course they had where they disappeared, and they were sending out search parties and looking for them for 2 weeks. And I was telling the wife, I was like, yeah, they're dead. Like, something happened. Like, if they've been gone this long, like, something happened when they went down. You know, they're probably not going to find them. And then they found wreckage that they were able to determine was the actual sub that went down, and it imploded when they went down there, and that's why they lost communication. Well, that's unfortunate. That really sucks, you know. But so watching this documentary about the digital scan and whatnot, one of the things they covered was, you know, I've always heard where they said that if when they spotted the iceberg, if they hadn't tried to turn away from it to try to go around it, if they had hit it head on, that maybe they would have actually stayed afloat, because of the fact that they could stay afloat with, I think it was like four compartments flooded. and they showed a little bit of a digital recreation or digital mock-up showing what would have happened if they would have hit it head on, and they showed the Titanic hitting the iceberg. It's like a head-on collision, you know, when you see a car that hits something head-on, and the whole front end is all smashed in, and sometimes they have to cut out the driver, you know, with like the jaws of life, because like they're um, trapped, you know, in the seat because all the crunched in metal or whatever. Well, that's kind of what the Titanic looked like. They literally on this digital recreation or animation or whatever. They showed as it's hit. They did it in slow motion. So as the Titanic's hitting the iceberg, the whole front end is literally crunching in like the front of a car, and it crunched in all the way up to the bridge, which I guess was still not more than 4 compartments. So according to this documentary, they're like, so obviously that's correct. Like they literally could have stayed afloat if they had hit the iceberg head on. But then they discussed but a lot of the staff members, a lot of the crew members lived in compartments that were, or in cabins that were up in the forward part of the ship. So if they hit it head on, they would have killed a lot of the crew members. You know, and you know, yeah, they would have stayed afloat. Blah blah blah. And I looked up at the wife. I was like, yeah, but I know they could stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. But if that whole front end is crushed in, they're not flooded. Like that whole front of the ship is gone. Like, wouldn't that mean that water would be coming into the other part? And she's like, well, no. According to them, like you can still stay afloat with that. I'm like, huh. Like I'm really curious. So, you know, before starting to record on this episode, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do a quick Google search. So I literally put on there. I was like, all right, so how would Titanic have stayed afloat if it had hit the iceberg? Hold on, apparently it auto-worded to if it had the iceberg. So I said, how would the Titanic have stayed afloat if it had hit the iceberg head on, if the whole front end of the ship would have been crunched in? And literally one of the very first things that pops up literally says, and I said like 275,000 results, said the Titanic would not have survived a head-on collision with an iceberg. Such an impact. Let me bring up this. That's what I love about doing these recordings with my condenser mic while on my computer, is I thought I've never done this before while doing an episode, so let me go ahead and I could actually have the like a website up while I'm recording, so I could actually discuss some results with you guys. So it's like, and the topic when I bring up this website, would the RMS Titanic have survived if it had collided head on with an iceberg? Let me get rid of this little advertisement going on here. That little pops up, one of those little videos that pops up saying, hey, you want to know? I'm not interested. Go away. First thing it says is no, the Titanic would not have survived a head-on collision with the iceberg. Such an impact would have caused further complications, potentially worsening the disaster. On the fateful day of 14 April 1912, the RMS Titanic, a luxury passenger ship described as unsinkable, collided with an iceberg, causing an accident of catastrophic proportions. Hundreds of lives were lost, accompanied by a massive loss of property. Several hypotheses were proposed after the accident on what could have been done to minimize the losses caused by the collision. One of the hypotheses suggested that if the Titanic had collided head-on with the iceberg, the damage to life and property would have been much less severe. This says, what if the Titanic hit the iceberg head-on? The RMS Titanic was equipped with collision bulkheads, which are watertight compartments designed to prevent flooding in case of collision or damage to the ship. So the ship would have survived the damage. Furthermore, the impact would have flooded the first 3 or at most 4 watertight compartments. As the Titanic was designed to remain underwater with Not sure why it says underwater. So the Titanic was designed to remain underwater with 4 watertight compartments. Such a catastrophic loss of life could not have been avoided. Those who agreed with the hypothesis blamed First Officer William Murdoch for his irresponsible actions that led to the disaster. It says, why did the Titanic hit the iceberg sideways instead of head on? The Titanic was a 55,000-ton ship and was traveling at 22 knots, almost 41 kilometers per hour. Note that unlike a fast-moving car, which stops in a few seconds when brakes are applied, a fast-moving ship takes a few minutes to stop completely when its engines are shut off. So if an iceberg is directly in front of a ship, the ship wouldn't come to a halt immediately, even if brakes were applied. And it shows a couple pictures here. Let's see. It says Titanic, hull, iceberg. And it shows, I guess, this is how the ship's side scraped against the iceberg. When First Officer Murdoch was informed about the imminent collision with the iceberg, he tried to steer the ship towards the left side to avoid a direct hit. However, despite his efforts, the ship collided with the iceberg, causing it to scrape along the side of the ship and tear its hull apart. Which is not true either. It didn't tear the ship apart. It actually... It's almost like more, like they said, the way they described it was like Morse code, I guess. It poked like little holes in the side of the ship, and they showed the and they kind of showed it on the documentary about the ship, which I don't know when this site was put up, but they showed it on the documentary with the digital scans about did it put like little holes in the side. There were literally, it was like most of the damage was in the first 3 compartments, and then they had a couple in the 4th, and then like 1 or 2 in the 5th. So literally what sunk the ship was only a couple of extra small holes that caused enough damage to where enough water was coming in, and as they got high enough and it pulled the front of the ship down, water started spilling over the bulkheads from one to the next, and that would pull the ship down even more, and that's how, like, they just couldn't stop it. Like, it was irreversible at that point. But definitely, I know they, for a while, they were, before they found the ship, I know they talked about how they thought that, like, the iceberg tore a big tear in the front of the ship. Then they determined after they found the wreck that wasn't the case. That it was actually little, you know, because it indented into the iron, you know, and basically causing little holes in the ship or whatever. So 3 problems with the head-on collision. Bulkheads, not as effective against an iceberg. The collision bulkheads on the bow of the Titanic were designed to survive a collision with another ship, but not an iceberg. They were erected as a precaution against such an event as happened to the RMS Republic in 1909, which I'm not even familiar with that one. The compartments of such bulkheads were more or less like the crumble zones of modern vehicles, meaning that they absorb most of the energy of the impact following a collision. The same thing would happen with the other ship that collided with yours, as it also absorbed some of the energy of the impact. In such a case, both the vessels would sustain heavy damages but would likely still stay afloat. If the Titanic were to collide with the iceberg, a stationary mammoth object, most of the energy of the impact would have been absorbed by the ship, which would have only made things worse. Abrupt halt, undesirably or utterly undesirable. If the Titanic had rammed head-on into the iceberg, it would have come to a halt almost immediately. Just think of what it feels like when you see a car swerving in front of you and you suddenly step on the brakes. An abrupt stop would have thrown people against cabins or berths, and since it was night and most passengers were asleep, they would have had absolutely no chance of bracing against the impact. They would have been flung into the things in their immediate vicinity. In addition, the condition of the workers at the front of the ship would have been worse. Extensive damage. In the event of a frontal collision, the impact would have extended the entire length of the ship. The splitting seams and bursting rivets, in which case many more of the ship's compartments would have been exposed to the sea, causing the ship to sink much faster. So that's kind of what I was thinking, even though the digital thing they did on the on the and again, guys, I want to throw it out there. If you I would like to know your thoughts. So if you have any kind of like a opinion about this, if you have thoughts about this, if you think that maybe it would have stayed afloat, bloggershowpodcast@gmail.com. Definitely reach out to me. Let me know what you think. So when I saw the digital recreation about the front end of the ship be crunched in, it didn't crunch in more than the four compartments. So according to them, they're like, see, well, based on this, the ship could have stayed afloat. I'm like, yeah, but I think having 4 compartments flooded is one thing, but 4 compartments gone because the whole front end is completely crushed in. I would have thought that, for me, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I think the ship would have sank faster because the whole front end's gone, and so it's like you don't have compartments blocking you anymore. You have the front end all gone and the ship basically taking out of water. But so according to this, says with the compartments would have been exposed to the sea, causing the ship to sink much faster. The idea that the ship would have survived if it had crashed head-on into the iceberg is therefore crazy. There are several claims and hypotheses that suggest a variety of approaches that could have reduced, if not completely avoided, the severity of the tragic wreck of the RMS Titanic. Still, it is definitely not one of them. So, okay, now I'm curious. Okay, so this is interesting. So I put in what actions, aside from hitting the Titanic head-on, could have saved the RMS Titanic. And of course, the first thing that pops up, if the Titanic had rammed the iceberg head-on, it would have survived. I'm like, but the previous one said no, it wouldn't have survived. Let me open up the site. Again, this is the first thing that pops up with the RMS Titanic have survived if it collided head-on with the iceberg. There's a no, the Titanic would not have survived a head-on collision. Such an impact would have further complications. I'm like, okay, let's see, hold on. Says I don't understand. Let's see. Yeah, because the one that pops up says if the Titanic had rammed the iceberg head on, it would have survived. However, there are several actions that could have reduced the severity of the wreck. But I'm like, but then I opened it up and it says no, it would not have survived. I'm like, let's see. So this one says, if the Titanic had rammed the iceberg head on, she would have survived. True, she probably would have done, as one of Titanic's designers, Edward Welding, explained in the following fascination exchange at the British Inquiry. Perhaps I ought to put this general question to you. The contact with this iceberg was the contact of a body weighing 50,000 tons, moving at a rate of 22 knots an hour. Yes. Okay, I gather to resist such an impact as that you could not build any plates strong enough as plates. The response is, it depends, of course, as on the severity of the contact. This contact seems to have been a particularly light one. It's light? Yes, light. Because we have heard the evidence that lots of people scarcely felt it. You mean it did not strike a fair blow? If she struck it a fair blow, I think we would. we would have heard a great deal more about the severity of it, and probably the ship would have come into harbor if she had struck it a fair blow instead of going to the bottom. You think that? I am quite sure of it. Commissioner, I am rather interested about that. Do you mean to say that if the ship had driven onto the iceberg stem, that she would have been saved? The response is, I am quite sure she would, my lord. I am afraid she would have killed every fireman down in the fireman's quarters, but I feel sure the ship would have come in. And the passengers would not have been lost? That's correct, sir. The passengers would have come in. Commissioners then do you think it was an error of judgment to starboard the helm? The response is, I do not by any means say it was a negligent act at all. It is very difficult to pass judgment on what would go through an officer's mind, my lord. Commissioners, an error of judgment and negligence are two different things altogether. A man may make a mistake and be very far from being negligent. Is that correct? He's like, yes. Commissioners, do you think that if the helm had not been starboard, there would have been a chance of the ship being saved? The response is, I believe the ship would have been saved, and I am strengthened in that belief by the case which your lordship will remember, where one large North Atlantic steamer some 34 years ago did go stem into an iceberg and did not come into port, and she was going fast. I am old enough to remember that case, but I am afraid my memory is not good enough. Mr. Lang, the Arizona, I remember it. Witness, the Arizona, my lord? Commissioner, you said it would have killed all the firemen? He's like, yes, I'm afraid she would have crumpled up and stopping herself. The momentum of the ship would have crushed in the bows for 80 or perhaps 100 feet. You mean the firemen in their quarters? Yes, down below. We know 2 watches were down there. Do you mean at the boilers? Oh no, they would scarcely have felt the shock. Commissioner, any person, fireman, or anybody else who happened to be in that 100 feet would probably never have been seen again. Commissioner, the third-class passengers are there too. I think some of them. The response, I do not think there are any third-class passengers forward of the second bulkhead. I believe she would have stopped before the second bulkhead was damaged. It is entirely crew there, and almost entirely firemen, trimmers, and greasers. The commissioner, your opinion is that the ship would have suffered that crushing in the first 2 compartments, but that the shock would not have shattered or loosened the rivets in any other part of the ship? The response, not sufficiently, as it would take a considerable length, 80 to 100 feet, to bring up. It is not a shock. It is a pressure that lasts 3 or 4 seconds. 5 seconds perhaps, and whilst it is a big pressure, it's not in the nature of a sharp blow. The commissioner, it would, I suppose, have shot everybody in the ship out of their berths. Response, I very much doubt it, my lord. Commissioner, at 22.5 tons an hour and being pulled up quite suddenly. Response, not quite suddenly, my lord. 100 feet will pull up a motor car going 22 miles an hour without shooting you out of the front. The commissioner, what do you mean? What you mean is that the ship would have telescoped herself? Response, yes, up against the iceberg. The commissioner, and stopped when she telescoped it enough? Yes, that is what happened in the Arizona. Very interesting. So it's like, of course, at the end of that, it's like, if you would like to read the full book of 101 things you thought you knew about the Titanic but didn't, or any of my other books on Titanic, please visit my author's page, blah blah blah, on Amazon. All right, so it's like reading that, I'm kind of thinking about it, like, you know, that he's saying that the ship would have like telescoped it onto the iceberg a little bit, which I guess makes sense, because what you see above water with an iceberg is only part of what, like, not the true size of the iceberg. Like, you see like a big part above the water, it's actually a lot bigger underneath. So I guess it would have gone up on the iceberg a little bit, would have still crunched in the front, but I don't know. Based on the based on the what I saw, and if you haven't seen it, you guys should go check it out. It's pretty fascinating. The documentary or whatever they have on one of the streaming platforms. Check out the digital scan they have online. You know, it's been popping up on Facebook and online and stuff. But the way they showed it, it showed the first like 4 compartments. It crunched up to the first 4, you know, almost up to the bridge. And they're like, yeah, but based on that, the ship would have survived, whatever. And I'm like, really? Like, even having those first couple compartments crunched in, like, wouldn't waters come in? I guess if it had like 2 or 3, I guess it would make sense, because it can stay afloat with those first 4 are flooded and not actually sink. But if that whole portion of the ship is gone, though, you know, I would think that wouldn't matter. That's not just flooding the compartments. That whole section is completely gone. You know, like if they're gone, they can't close the watertight doors. You know, so it's so it's like, so can it really stay afloat? I don't know. But so on that note, guys, that's pretty much what, you know, when I kind of, you know, I watched that. I read a couple articles online about the Titanic for this past week, and I watched the documentary, kind of looked at the scan. I was like, that's pretty fascinating, you know. And I was asking the wife random questions about it, like, hey, I know I've heard that they had some of the rich people on there that had like cars, like some of the first version of like the vehicles or whatever on the Titanic. They're in like some of the lower storage areas or lower compartments, or like storage compartments or whatever. And and I asked her, I said, I wonder if they could ever like bring up some of that stuff, or if there's no way to, because they wouldn't be able to really get into the ship to actually get it out, you know. But that would be pretty fascinating to see, like, hey, there's a 1912 car that was brought up from the Titanic. But I kind of figured as much, but she had this kind of response that I thought she was going to have, like, yeah, but there's no way for them to like, they could have little robotic submersibles that can go into the Titanic and look around, but there's really not any way to get in there and, you know, take something out, you know, like people to remove something big out of the inside of the ship or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, you know, makes sense pretty much. And then one of the things I found fascinating when they're showing the digital predictions of what might have happened as it sank, that like the bow end, because it, you know, it sank obviously going with the front of the ship down, and then it of course plowed into the seafloor really hard, so it's like 25 to 50 feet buried into the seafloor and the dirt. But then it talked about the stern, when after the ship broke apart, and then when the stern finally sank beneath the waves, it did kind of a corkscrew, like it circled around as it went down. And I'm like, how do they know that? You know, because I mean, it couldn't, like, even though it had that front end of the stern section completely wide open, couldn't it have just sank straight down? And then one of the things I had thought for a while, and I figured, was that I was wondering for like a while, like, hey, if something sinks, does it just sink and it just steadily goes towards the bottom? But then I was like, or does it gain? I figured it probably gained speed as it went below the waves. Like, hey, once it goes below the water line, it just gains speed until it finally hits the bottom. And I guess according to online, that's kind of what happens. So I'm like, you know, but I guess, like I said, like in some of my I talked about like what topics I might discuss in some of these Real Talk Tuesdays, how there might be maybe like true crime or shipwrecks or whatever. And so like I've always been fascinated with shipwrecks in general. So like the Titanic especially, but um, like I don't know how I came across. I think there's like some shipwrecks because of like that I came across online about like from like ships that sank during war or whatever. And there's one. Let me see. Let me do a quick search here while I'm. Bring up the where to do shipwrecks of carriers, and of course like there's even like there's some like vehicles that come up and I'm like, that's not a carrier, like what the heck. So yeah, I'm not seeing it on here, but it is showing some random wrecks or whatever. But there was one I found that it showed like a sonar image, or showed like it was able to like I guess do it showed a pretty clear image, and it was a really big aircraft carrier that had sunk, and it had, of course it ended up on the bottom upright, whatever, and it was like I don't know, probably like 2 football fields long or something. Maybe not quite, I don't know. Maybe like a football field and a half, like 500, 600, 700 feet long. And you could see like U.S. Navy or something on the top or whatever. It had been hit by like 2 or 3 torpedoes and went down really fast, and like everybody was killed on it. I was like, oh wow, okay. So, and then of course I did a search the other day. I was kind of curious, kind of going along with the shipwreck theme with the, but I did a search the other day about, are there still any famous shipwrecks that have not been located, have not been found? And there's a couple of them. There's like maybe like a half a dozen. There's one that basically talked about like it had like it had like $2 billion worth of gold, and it sank. I don't know. It was probably like within the last 200 years. And they found the anchor. Like the anchor was discovered, but they never found the shipwreck. And I'm like, you would think if it had $2 billion worth of treasure on it, that it would have been located. I'm like thinking like, all right, well maybe because it maybe had been underwater and wrecked long enough that maybe as tides shifted or whatever, maybe it got buried underneath like the dirt and debris down at the bottom of the ocean, Because otherwise, I'm like, if it had that much treasure on it, somebody I would think would have found it by then or by now, And if I was daring enough, I thought, if I was daring enough, and I would actually try to get buy a vessel and literally like finance it myself and go out there where it's suspected it would have gone down and start doing like little sonar things. But if you're looking out in the ocean, you're looking at like where it's one thing to look at like a lake where you might be a little bit deep, but ocean, a couple miles deep, probably got to have a pretty big vessel to go look. So yeah, little pipe dreams, daydreams. Like, yeah, I could never do that probably. But anyway, y'all, I hope y'all enjoyed this episode. I thought it'd be interesting to change it up a little bit, and actually like something that I kind of have been inspired about recently. And I thought, that'd be fun to talk about, So, but I'm not going to give away what's happening. There's actually a little bit of a surprise I have for you coming up, and the next couple days. Hopefully you guys are excited when you realize what it is. But I'm working on trying to get the website back up. Trying to figure out what I want to do with that, because I basically got to pay a big sum to either get the site back up the way it was or switch the bloggershow.com domain over somewhere else and basically just start over from scratch. But I'm kind of like, all right, or at least get the domain set up and be a little more basic with it. Get a support site set up or a support league set up for people to want to support the site, support the show, whatever. But anyway, on that note, as always, you know what I always say: keep pushing forward, keep believing, believe you can, believe you will, and you're already halfway there. And then you just have to go out there and do it. But as always, I appreciate you being here. Appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so much for everything. Just keep doing what you're doing. As long as we keep getting up. Every time we get knocked down, as long as we keep getting back up, then you've never failed. So we only fail if we quit, give up, and walk away. So keep getting back up, keep fighting. So on that note, guys, I appreciate you, and I'll talk to you on the next one. Have a good one.